Welcome to Independent Nation. Tonight is Wednesday, November the 12th, 2014, and this is a very special evening. This is the last show of Season 1 of Independent Nation. Independent Nation is a show that is run for the purpose of discussing politics. In this case, the theme is this past year has been the Toronto elections. In fact, we started on January 13th, 2014. My name is John Richardson, and I'm working with my colleague, Mr. Bahman Yazdanfar, and we started on January the 13th, 2014 with a simple question: what do you think of the Toronto elections? I'll start with that tonight. Bahman, what do you think of the Toronto elections?
There is a lyric in an old song by Glenn Fry, and it says, "Lots has happened, nothing changed." We had 10 months of the turbulence, not only Toronto election, we had a premature general election in Ontario, and then we had at least 4 or 5 by-election federally, and the same people just came back.
What do you attribute that to? I mean, I do remember on the very first show making the point. I mean, part of the purpose of the show was to get people motivated, to get them to run as candidates, and most certainly to get out and vote. And although the voter turnout was reasonably high this time by Toronto standards, still a very large percentage of people didn't bother to vote, and I absolutely believe that any candidate who could inspire those who don't vote to get out and vote could probably win.
Well, as a sidekick, first of all, maybe our show is responsible for that 10% increase.
I'm sure that it was. There could have been
on the voters' turnout. However, seriously speaking, even on the first show, when we touched on this subject, I mentioned that it's like a small beverage company fighting against Coca-Cola. These people, good citizens with a good intention, well informed, they come to the scene as candidates, and then they face incumbent. Well established, plenty of resources, money, and manpower. Volunteers, and establishment. And it's very difficult to really fight with these incumbents, unless we have fundamental changes in our policy and in our Elections Act.
Well, you know, on that point, I mean, I wonder how many people fully understand what a great commitment to the community it is to even get out, throw your hat in the ring and run. I mean, I was amazed by the quality of the candidates. As you know, I have a particular interest in Ward 29. I moderated the only debate, incredible debate. That's unbelievable. Well, in Ward 29.
First of all, thank you to put that kind of effort for your community.
My pleasure. But, I've got to say that I was impressed with all of the candidates. I mean, they had strong commitment to the community. They were articulate. They were well informed on the issues. And frankly, any one of them would have made a fine city councilor.
You would be surprised that it was not isolated to Ward 29. I have had the pleasure of meeting different candidates from different wards. We had some of which in our show, and interestingly enough, even though many of them were first-time candidates, they were well informed, well versed, and they had a specific vision for the city or the ward that they are living in, and they have a very clear understanding of what they want to do as soon as they get elected and go to the city hall. Unfortunately, we got the same incumbents back there, and the same the old Burke's Club are there, men and women. It's not there is no issue of the male or female, but the expression, the old boys club is back to the station.
Same old faces in the city hall.
Yes, that is why I said lots has happened. People came and go, but nothing really changed in the core of the city hall.
Well, in the 2010 election, there was that Better Ballots group that was focused on the electoral process. And in 2014, we had the same process, and it seems to me that the two big culprits in terms of making it hard to get change would be, one, the absence of term limits. I mean, many of these city councilors basically, I think, are at the point where they're treating the job as a pension,
or second home.
Some sort of a life entitlement. And make no mistake about it. I mean, they're very serving, and being a name brand councilor in the community gives them the opportunity to run essentially, 24/7. But the other thing that I think is a huge problem is retaining the first past the post
which
rule.
is the major problem across the nation, federally, municipally, and provincially.
That's right. I mean, it makes it possible to win these elections with
a minimum, yes.
with a very, very
small
small percentage of votes.
But however, in the difference between the number of the votes, surprisingly, were very large in recent municipal election.
I was very surprised by some of the results.
I checked, as you know, one of my bad habits is after the night of each election, I just draw all of or write down or copy all of the votes, and I do my own calculation. And
that's why I check with you first before the official news source.
Thank you very much. And I noticed that some of these incumbents, the large majority of them, who let's say won in 2010 by the difference of 2,000 or 3,000 votes, this time around they won with 10,000, 9,000.
Well, that certainly shows you, I think, the power of incumbency. Again, it's funny. When I was moderating the Ward 29 debate, there were 5 candidates present, and I actually asked the question what their position was on term limits. 4 of the 5 took the position there should be term limits, whether it was 2 terms, 3 terms, or whatever.
And yes, I get incumbent.
Remember that?
Of course.
Said
incumbent
no term limits. No, of course incumbents don't want term limits, and it is completely wrong. Sometimes they'll say, well, there are term limits. It's called an election. That's completely wrong.
I don't have any problem with that philosophy neither, as long as it is the fair election. And by fair election, I mean equal opportunity, equal media time, equal press time, and equal money and equal resources. Then I want to see how far incumbent can go.
Well, I think that in all likelihood they'd still have a very strong competitive advantage, because I think that the way to look at this, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on my thought. Okay, it's the psychology of how voters, that is the ones who vote, how they think. If the question that a voter is asking is, do we want to keep the incumbent in, or do we want to get a new city councilor, then I think the incumbent will always win, for the simple reason that if the answer is no, we don't want to have the incumbent in, then the larger the number of candidates, the more the potential for the vote to be watered down.
Well, you have a point in the sense of the people, generally speaking, especially Canadians. The culture of Canadians are very polite, very subdued, kind of the climate collectively.
That was not my experience at the Ward 29 debate.
Well, it is just isolated. That is why I say collectively across the nation. And the point I am trying to make is I agree with what you said. Probably one of the reasons that people are inclined to vote for the incumbent is not they don't want a drastic change. They are probably afraid of, we have this, we have already tried him or her for 3-4 years or whatever the term is, and then why rock the boat? We don't have that much of the drastic change in our ward.
You really think that's what it's?
No, I'm saying it's probably one of the reasons. I'm not saying it is the reason. However, again, I go back to the fair campaign. The advantages that the incumbent has, first of all, 4 years being in the office, using the taxpayers' money and facility to promote himself or herself. That is one thing. So even though we have 10 months campaign time, These people, as soon as they get elected, they start the campaign for the next election, which is 4 years from now. So any newcomer still is 3 years behind.
Well, they don't start the campaign. They are the campaign.
Well, they are the campaign, of course.
It's their very
Even better
existence.
analogy, yes. But nevertheless, for me, the problem is, as you mentioned, very bright people, very courageous people. Anyone who put his or her face or name in front of the public with the limited resources and say, I am going to fight with the big giant of incumbent, you have to really give tip of your hat to them.
Well, of course you do. But I tend to see this much more simply. I think the incumbents are just better at getting the people who will vote for them out.
It's like the old. There was, if you remember, in early 2000. I am not really a sport kind of. I'm not following a sport, but if you remember, there was a baseball team in Oakland that they try to change the game, and they come with the numbers and statistics and all of and they change the way the game of the baseball was played. So if anyone wants to change the system we have here, they have to change the game.
Okay, so what would be some of this? So you would agree, I assume, with term limits?
Term limits, of course, a revision on the Election Act.
Okay. Well, let's be specific. I mean, would you agree with abolishing first past the post?
Of course.
I got to tell you something.
Definitely.
I just thought of something interesting. I'm almost embarrassed to admit this, since I know this is being taped, but I will, because I think it points to a problem with the system. But
we don't tell anyone.
Okay, don't tell anybody. Thank you. I didn't vote because I wasn't able to vote. Here's what happened.
In this election?
Yeah. I didn't get the the voter's card.
I didn't.
You didn't either?
No, but I went there and registered on the
ballot. So the first thing I tried to do, that I was up earlier, and I went at 8:45, discovered they didn't open till 10.
Yeah, it was bankers' hours.
I mean, how in the world can the opportunity to vote be delayed until 10 o'clock? I mean, that's totally insane. I mean, basically, it should probably be 24 hours if they're going to run it.
Of course, even a week.
Yeah, or for example, look at India. One of the world's great democracies. I mean, the voting goes on for a month. Now, I do appreciate there was early voting, but the idea of the voting hours starting at 10 a.m.
Everybody's at work
is crazy, absolutely crazy.
And
then I went to another place, another voting station, only to be told that there was good news and bad news. The good news is that they were able to confirm that I did exist.
Oh, that is.
And therefore I was eligible to vote. The bad news was that I couldn't vote at that particular station. They wanted to send me to another one, at which point I was late for my meeting and had to go. So, I mean, I mention this because I tried to vote twice, actually twice, and wasn't able to vote. And it seems to me that that's inexcusable. It's crazy.
Of course, that is why I'm emphasizing on the rules of the Election Act. Mm-hmm. One, we have advanced voting. That's correct. I appreciate that. But for a city in the magnitude of we have about 1.6 million eligible voters in this city, I believe this city should have at least, if we have 10 months campaign period, we have to have at least 5 days of the voting period.
Voting period? You mean the
window of opportunity to people?
Well, how do you respond to the argument there was early voting for a certain period of time?
It is not an excuse, because if you put the advanced voting on the two or three weekends for 3 days, maybe on the weekend people go on the vacation. Yeah. Maybe they go for cottages. But when you put a window of the 5 days or 1 week, then there is no excuse for any eligible voter say, I did not have time between Monday to next Sunday.
I just think that to wait till 10 o'clock to open the doors.
And that is another thing. If City Hall staff started work at 7 o'clock and they started drilling on the street that I live in at 7 o'clock in the morning, why the voting officials don't put the desk and people and the ballot at 7 or 8 o'clock?
Well, so we agree there needs to be electoral reform, but on that point, I mean, this is something we've talked about before. There are people who argue electoral reform should include the possibility of political parties in municipal elections.
I personally, as you know me for a long time, I am against of the let me put it bluntly, dictatorship of the 2 or 3 political parties.
I didn't know that.
Well, it is written all over internet.
You're sure?
Of course.
Okay.
But having said that, if as part of the electoral reform there is a need for political parties to be to exist in City Hall, why not? As long as rules are fair, rules are the problem we have with the political parties, or rather mainstream political party, is not the political party. It's the fact that the political agenda, the party agenda, trumps the people agenda.
Mm-hmm.
That means it's uneven playground.
Well, that's right. I mean,
that is the problem.
To put another way with the parties, the candidate or the elected representative's allegiance is to the party and
not the constituents. And the constituents, why should you go 3 times or 4 times trying attempt to vote if you end up to get to someone who doesn't even return your call?
Well, that certainly is true. I mean, I don't have any sense at all that these representatives are particularly responsive. But here's the thing, Bahman. I mean, isn't it more accurate to say that we don't officially have political parties in municipal elections?
No. Of course not. And 7 years of the Miller, we had, if you remember, we had Karen Stentz in our show.
I do remember that.
And I asked very simply, I said, okay, 7 years of the Miller, all of the, not all, but most of the council were toward the left or far left, toward the NDP. And how come nothing is being done?
Done about what?
About the issues that affects the normal citizens, like a transit, like a sewage, like a water, like a cleaner water, like a development.
Well, I think that one of the realities is that there's always a certain number of people, or I think political parties who are perfectly happy to hurt the city to help, some other interest.
Well, then we have to have justification for the money they get. 105,000 plus the perks of each individual that represent one ward. And as you said just earlier, you were the only one who organized one candidate debate in the whole election.
I think it's very clear the incumbents do not want debate.
That is ridiculous. So how do you justify? If you remember, we had a couple school trustees in our show.
I do.
Very educational program. Even I learned a lot.
Actually, that was the first time I ever even understood what a school trustee did. That would be a great. I mean, I think that's an important thing.
Yeah, and it's a good comparison. They went from $60,000 to $5,000 salary at the time of the Harris, and then they gradually came back to $24,000, $25,000, and still they are doing the same job, the same amount of the work that the counselor does, if not more. Mm-hmm. And our counselor get 4 times more. They have a fancy office. They don't have to do much about going out and deal with the Constitution, and yet no matter how much they claim they have done for their ward, I challenge that is justify the money that we pay them.
Well, my impression is, and I'm sure people would disagree, but my impression is that we could get just every bit as good quality of city councilor, and very possibly better, even if they were paid less. And in fact, you might get your best quality city councilors if they were paid nothing.
Again, go back to that analogy of the baseball that I mentioned mentioned that earlier. In that instance, that team lost big names from their team, 3 of the big name players, and then they went and they got this small that nobody wanted to touch them with cheaper price. So if the big league team paying $1 million, $2 million at that time to their baseball player, this team paid $200,000-$300,000. And yet they managed to break the record for the 20 consecutive time to win their league. The games.
Sounds like the San Antonio Spurs basketball
I think
team,
it's Oakland or something like that. Again, I'm not good at those. But the essence of the story is the same as what we are seeing in our governments, municipal, provincial, and federal. While you settle under city, we had a provincial election, which was uncalled for.
You know, I find about those provincial elections, they generate less interest than any other kind of election.
Now, why is that?
You know, I have never really understood why that is, but certainly the Toronto mayor's election, and I think even what was going on in the various wards generated more interest than the Ontario election. I don't know. What's your theory on that? Is it that is it in fact that the MPPs are so disconnected from their constituents that there's no interest at all?
Well, we started our program, our show about 10 months ago. I sent invitations at least minimum of 2, maximum of 4 or 5 times to all city councillors and MPPs. And maybe 15 or 16% respond I got, which they decline or they just automated that we receive your invitation. No response. I had only 2 MPPs on my show. One of them was retiring, if you remember, Miss Cansfield, and Sue Wong, who won from the Liberal Party, and we had only one councillor, John Parker, who graciously accepted our invitation. He was open, and interestingly enough, he was the only incumbent who was not elected. I think I hope it's not our shows, because I don't know about that. But as you said, we have 107 MPPs, 44 councillors. It gives us about 151. Out of 151, we managed to get only 3 of them in the show. So they are that, and I am one of their constituents anyhow. I'm a taxpayer.
I don't think that's too bad. I think you should look at the fact that we did get 3 of them. Right?
Well, the point you mentioned, they are not in touch with their constituents. That is what I'm trying to verify.
Well, the simple fact is that for a lot of these people, election to political office is simply a pension, a retirement plan.
And the party. I think they treat the party, I'm talking again mainstream parties, like a corporate, and they have to climb the ladder of the ladder to get somewhere.
Let me ask you about, and relatively short answers on 2 specific things. Toronto mayor's race. What did you think of that, watching that unfold over the year?
Well, if you remember, I predicted that Rob Ford will be elected. Because of the numbers.
I agreed with you.
And unfortunately, I dropped out.
I don't think that Doug Ford was a substitute for Ford.
Not only that, actually, the 2 things is very interesting, because you brought this issue of the numbers. If you remember, on the very first show, we gave a couple of numbers. I gave 800 or 900,000 people to participate in the election, and Rob Ford will have at least 400,000 of them, his base. Even though Doug Ford does not have the likable kind of the personality as Rob Ford has, and he has started only last 6 weeks, he managed to get 350,000 of that. So if Rob Ford was in the race, Still, I believe he was elected.
I think he would have won as well.
I mean, yes, he would have.
I agree with you.
And another point to the number again, when I counted all of the votes, I noticed there is a discrepancy of 55,000 plus votes between people who voted just for mayor and people who voted for mayor and councillor. And our ballot in City of Toronto is such a way that you get one ballot. The first row is for the candidates for the mayor, second row for the councillor, and third row for your school trustees. I can understand if people go and they don't know their school trustees. But I cannot accept the fact that 55,000 people went to the went to the polling stations, took their time, go there, and just mark for the mayor and didn't mark for the.
Well, Bahman, I think you've got to accept it. That's clearly what happened. I mean,
unfortunately or fortunately, I was not in the race, and really, I don't have enough resources to go pursue that. But if I was one of those courageous people or few of those courageous people who put their name on the ballot, I would pursue that, because under Section 58 of the Municipal Election Act, anyone who believes that there is a discrepancy in the electoral process, in the counting, they can apply for the Superior Court of Ontario within 30 days from the date that the result is declared, official result, and they ask for the recount.
Well, we're within that 30-day period. I mean, that may very well happen. That may happen. Let's wait and see.
So the point is, if there is or even if this has happened, there is a shortcoming of the electoral clerks to inform them.
Mm-hmm.
So that is why I said we need electoral act.
Well, there's definitely work to be done, I think, on all fronts. What are your sort of favorite memories of some of the shows we've had?
Every one of them I have memories. We can show to our audience some of the issues we brought up, and some of the people that I remember. For instance, do you remember the issue of the FATCA? Do you remember about that?
FATCA?
Yeah.
I do remember FATCA, yes.
Yeah, we had about 3 shows regarding that matter. Even though it's not a subject that every Tom and Dick and Harry knows about that, every member of the society.
Oh, yes, the ones who know the least about it would be the government of Canada.
Of course. Those people just go and get the party whip, tell them how to vote without reading what they are signing and voting for. We had a episode. I just put a minute of that to see one of our very dear citizens.
So FATCA is this U.S. law that is trying to.
The issue is not even because of U.S. IRS wants to go after the money of the taxpayers, whether or not he justifies who pay tax, who has to pay them or not. The issue was government of Canada to pass a law get into the agreement with the foreign nation to provide them with the financial information of their own citizen to the foreign nation. That was the problem for me.
God.
And penalize banks not to do so.
Penalize the banks and not do so.
The very bank that I cannot even escape from a couple dollars of the service charge for every check.
So find them, identify them, and turn them over to the IRS. Okay.
And later on, of course, during the last 10 months, you brought different guests, or we invited different guests, ordinary citizens. They are not politicians, they are not member of the elite, they are just ordinary politicians that are being affected by the laws and regulation that happens behind the doors by our federal government.
That would be everybody.
And that is important for citizens to know, educate themselves, to understand. The issue of voting is not just going and putting an X. you have to be part of take part in your process before you become another victim.
Well, that's right. I mean, democracy requires not only voting, but requires educated voting.
Educated voting starts from the school.
Which school?
Every school, which unfortunately we don't have curriculum. And even I asked some of our candidates some of our guests that why we don't have that, and they didn't have any answer. We teach our children about sex education. We don't teach them about the democracy and voting and the process and how their future is being mapped.
You don't teach them about financial management either, investing. Don't teach them good manners.
I think if they know how to participate you see, we are blessed in this country, or any country that has at least a voting system as part of their democracy. It is the only tools available to the public that they can make difference.
Yep, as long as it's a real vote with real choice.
Of course.
I think that, one of the problems that we have is not a lack of the opportunity to vote, but a lack of choice in the opportunity.
Well said. And part of that, as you mentioned, is education. Then we had again the gentleman, the second show that we had about the. Let me just get you to the part that a little bit interesting. Here you are.
But what Gwen's saying is they don't have any right to her money either. That is even the right of an American living in Canada. Gwen, you mentioned taxes and penalties. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I mean, even if the banks are not required to report the fact that you have RESPs, RDSPs, and TFSAs, does not mean that the United States still doesn't consider those to be taxable items. Correct. Which means that you have to report those things, and they can be taxed and will be taxed. But why should my children's RESP that I've put money into, and my Canadian government has also put money into, why should that be taxed by the IRS? That's ridiculous.
Well, those types of things, as I understand, are not even taxable in Canada. Is that right?
Right, they're not taxable.
Okay.
You mentioned about the favorite shows, and let's go a little bit of the traveling through the time. On our show, episode number 4, if you remember, I want to see if you remember this one.
And Fringe Party.
You were not here. I want to see if you...
I remember the ones I wasn't there best.
And
things like implementable. Remember Bahman?
but don't you think
Could make a law in Canada.
Again, in this
The
show,
capital wouldn't flee the
we
country.
spoke with a couple of
not to the same
citizens.
extent it does now, but in the globalized
We
world.
did not talk
capital
about with
flight
the
is very
politicians.
easy, right?
because
The thing, even when Bob Ray got
yes,
power,
it is
he could
Mr.
not do
Hugh,
a traditional
and we had
ADP,
another gentleman by the name of Slogan.
platform.
in
not
that
just
show,
go away
that
and
they
try to
showed
get
the
back
Because they didn't have the money.
about the
They could not
electoral
go and
process
borrow
That
the
is
money.
why I'm
how
saying that
the
what
voice
he
is
illustrates,
unheard.
because they didn't have the money.
I'm making a slightly different
Yeah.
point, and that is that
Well, that is,
you know,
I
there
think,
was
the
a
main
time
problem
when
is
a
that people
socialist
don't think it
government that got
matters whether
elected
they
in
vote,
Canada
who they
could do
vote for.
things
And that's
like
a great
implement a
tragedy. I
Medicare
keep
system,
coming back to this point.
or
Anybody can
implement
harness the energies of those who don't vote can win any election.
It is a game of opportunity. You will just be there.
That's right.
Is just be there, and they are in our shows. Fortunately, we had number of the people from the different walks of life, and even different level of the political system. In show number 5, if you remember, we had Honorable Sinclair Stevens.
I do remember that. Always a
And
pleasure to have
just
Sinclair.
listening to just a minute of him to see the actually it was my apology, it was show number 7 again. My numbers here is a little bit it was very interesting.
Well, now that's an icon of Canadian politics, isn't it?
And interesting to see how he criticizes
What are your thoughts on the electoral?
the existing conservative government.
Do you think the
And yet he is conservative himself.
Oh, they're very, very different. The Conservative Party has its genesis in the Reform Party, right, which is an Alberta-based local party, which essentially orchestrated a takeover of the Conservative
Which
Party.
they really addressed that.
And, yeah, I mean, that's been the subject of lawsuits, to this day. I mean, it's a very, very interesting part of Canadian political history, actually.
And it was a change, a big change in the federal way of doing things. The way the election, again, the reason I brought this piece here goes back to the election reform. Election reform is not necessarily has to be done in just municipal level, provincially and federally. In fact, if you remember, we had a gentleman who was who ran about 7 times federally. Let me see if your
We
memory.
ran 7 times federally.
Yes, on behalf of Canadians Action Party, very well educated man.
I do remember, yes. Yeah, extremely
And
articulate.
he was talking about the need for the election.
If you, whatever people say
Yes,
about
I remember that evening very well.
what you have,
Exceptionally articulate guest.
Let's see. And
that space,
he
might
was
open that space to actually
explaining
talk about that. We
how
certainly couldn't talk about that in the U.S.
the
And that is-
interference
that is
between the
blasphemy.
government
You don't talk
to the Election Act and Elections Canada, it's costing citizens in electing proper representative for their constituencies. And you know what, these people like this gentleman Will Arlo
That's really
don't
strange.
really
But there is democracy that they say. They must
That's
be able to talk about that.
that's window dressing on top, right? In Canada, we still have a little space, I think. to
Well, they
talk
don't,
about some
and
of
this is, I
those
think,
ideas that
a
are much farther
central
from
problem of
the
democracy,
political center.
probably in the Western world in
U.S. that
general.
space is very constrained. There's
Is
just stuff
how
we just don't talk about.
to
Obama got himself in trouble. Remember, he was touring the Rust Belt and he said
maintain a
he's charged and gone
process
for 20 years and they're not
that
going to
encourages good people to run, that makes it possible for them to run.
maybe it is by design.
Well, maybe maybe what you do is all elections are funded, and everybody gets a certain share. I don't know what you do, but the simple fact of the matter is that I don't think anybody could seriously say that we're getting the best candidates on the ballot.
Then, talking about the individuals that they really take the game on their own hand, we had a gentleman by the name of Greg Vezina who registered a new provincial party, none of the above party, who had a big buzz in the media. And let's see how animated and how passionate this gentleman is.
Well, but that's the thing. You see, you gotta,
And very
you
well
gotta.
educated.
It's like being Howard Beale in the movie Network.
talking about
you know?
politics.
I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore.
He does look
People
animated
got
to
to get
me.
up.
Yeah,
off,
look at
you got to
that.
get up off your ass, okay? You got to go out of
And
the bar.
everything
You gotta
He's the
people gotta
one who
realize
took
that
elections
our
Ontario.
politicians are making
Because
very
election
important
Ontario didn't
decisions
want
on
to
our behalf
approve
that are
his
costing
name,
us a
none of
lot
the
of money.
above party.
And they do
He
these
took
things,
them to challenge them
and
to
they
the court,
alienate people, and they
filed the
split the
application,
vote, and they
and just
suppress
at
the
2 o'clock,
vote.
just 2
And
minutes,
they
a
do
few
that
minutes
because
before 2
the
o'clock,
people that are
they
active in politics
chose
are
to
the movers
approve
and
it
shakers
and
and
not
the
go
whiners
through
and
the
complainers
challenges
and the people
in
with
the
the
court.
special interests.
Well, they were opposing
And if
just
they're
because
the
they didn't
people that are
like
involved
it.
in
I mean, there's
politics,
no
then they're the
legal
people that
basis
squeak the
for
wheel
it.
gets
No,
lost.
but
They're
they
the
came
people
with
that
the
run the show.
excuses that could
And the
confuse
50% or 51% that
voters.
stay at
And
home
I did not understand how they.
do it.
Well, how about calling the current government Conservative Party of Canada? It seems to me that's confusing voters.
Well, of course, but they have the media and the money and resources behind them.
Right.
This guy doesn't have it. He has his own family, his wife and his sons.
Lester Pearson, who won a
Eh,
Nobel
eh, and,
Prize, Canada was a world leader.
Having said that, regarding the election, our journey during last 10 months was not without controversy neither. We had certain shows that people really collided because of the ideology. But you were not there.
Oh, that's why I don't remember.
You don't know. We had one episode between a newcomer, which was on the show number 9, if I can find it, and retiring MPP. Which I asked the question about the issue was between about the TTC, why the provincial government and the municipal government is not working together, and the issue of the metro links and the role of the metro links. And then they got with a heated, little rather heated
Why project? Not simple in a sense.
argument.
Hey, God, you look very authoritative there, Bahman.
It's just camera. You have to ask our studio manager Hugh, who was not there that day, but he had his staff over there and creating that kind of the image for me. Now, as you see with the body language, the Paul Bell, first-time candidate for the Ward 33, challenging Miss Cansfield, who is retiring. And by the way, she used to be head of a school district board, which I asked in the same show about the political education.
Right.
So as you see, we provided a lot of information. We had a lot of guests that they provided a lot of good information for our audience. So there is and I'm pretty sure hundreds, if it's not thousands, of the other people doing same thing for the public. The question is the interest of our citizens to go and just spend some time to educate themselves and come back to your original thoughts that you said.
Well, I think that part of the problem is that in Western democracies, people are just too wealthy. You know, they have the luxury to not worry about this. You know, because they're backed up by, sophisticated human rights documents and assumptions, and reasonably predictable legal systems, and they have no idea what it's like to live under the kind of tyranny that people in some parts of the world do.
But a couple of the candidates disagree with what you say, that we are too wealthy about that, because of they brought the issue of the income disparity. And I can see if I find out, it was on episode 14, I think, yes, episode 14. Let me see if I can find it. So it was between the Arthur Smitherman, which coincidentally he is the brother of the Mr. Smitherman who ran in 2010, with completely different view from him. And we had James Sears, who was the first-time candidate in Ward 32, which, by the way, I have to mention that he ran a campaign of completely, totally out-of-the-box kind of the system. Go to the point that put the caricature of the incumbent on his website and invite people to spank her. I mean, you don't see, because we are, again, in our Canadian culture, we don't want to say, public generally speaking, they want to be polite. They don't want to bring everything.
So he didn't have a lot of respect for the incumbent.
Oh, he didn't have a lot of respect, not only for the incumbent, but the whole structure of the city. And in this episode, he's focusing on the 8,000 people in the city of Toronto that they take home more than 100,000 a year. Which was a very, very important point to make regarding the disparity of the income, which is by taxpayer in this case.
Right.
So then you said, if the reason in people in Canada they are too wealthy or well enough to not to pay attention.
I don't think every individual, but I think that society as a whole.
Oh, of course. I'm just trying to split the hair in this case. Then we brought in one show, if you remember, you brought it up, the issue of the corporate tax. Again, goes back to the two things. One is the income disparity of the citizens, and second, how they deal with the city hall and other governmental institutions. If you remember, we had on episode 13, we had Leroy Germain and John Papadakis.
Oh yes. That was a rather lively show. I do remember
yes,
that.
They were animated, educated,
Yes.
very informed.
Animated, educated, and informed.
I put it on if I can. Please excuse me for our technical handicapness of me, because
I mean, this is a lot of passion. Look at this. A lot of passion.
these people, we need these people to fight for us.
We need the passion, absolutely. You know, I'm sitting here looking at Mr. Papadakis here, and I don't know why he didn't win.
I don't, and he used to be a counselor on the East York where before amalgamation.
Yes, and he educated us on that.
Yes, and he was talking about how the smaller government could take more care of their citizens and the residents than having a big city of Toronto become like a.
Right. Well, he was the city councilor before the amalgamation, and has a very different memory of how it could run. And for that reason alone, it would have been very valuable to have had him in city council.
Of course, because then he could. He was one of those who referred to your earlier question. He was one of those that who was in favor of having a political party within the city of Toronto.
I do recall that. Yes.
So there is all sorts of the ideas, all sorts of the visions.
It's the passion. The passion of these people is absolutely incredible.
And when I look at some of the all candidates debates locally, I couldn't see that kind of the passion from incumbents. Have you seen that kind of the passion?
Well, no, well, of course not. I mean, but part of the reason is the incumbents don't want the debates. I mean, that's clear. Why would they want to have a debate? They have nothing to gain and everything to lose. I mean, the name of the game for the incumbents is to basically minimize exposure of competitor candidates.
So just by being there reluctantly, that kills their passion. What you're saying?
Well, I mean, I didn't, visit all the debates, but I do think that non-incumbents tend to come to this with more passion and more ideas.
Then you want to see the passion. We had another moment that I think it become very soon an icon of the internet, when we had the two first-time candidates, Ward 32 and Ward 33, debating and disagreeing over a subject,
Because she's afraid
which
of
in this case that the viewers are seeing was the incumbent of the Ward 32. And Ward 30, the candidate for Ward 33 was defending the incumbent of Ward 32 because of her favor for the term limit. However, she was running again. And if you just look at their body language, they are short of the fist fight very soon.
I notice you're staying away from both of them, Bahman.
No, I'm trying to stay. I don't have very pretty face, but I don't want to make more damage than it is already.
Indeed. On the damage, I mean.
So we have all of these passionate people put their time, come and do all sorts of the debates, bring all ideas, bring all visions, and yet we end up with the old-fashioned people that some of them are there for 17 years.
It's very, very hard to beat the incumbents. But what about a couple clips? I mean, we had John Parker one night, who I think exceptional interview, and he lost, interestingly.
And
we had Ken Sintz, who believes in term limits and stepped down.
For instance, in episode 8, John Parker educated us about how the city of Toronto deal with the issues like a TTC.
Yes, that was a particularly enlightening evening. Yes, there he was. I do remember that night.
Very nice gentleman.
Yes, absolutely.
Although I have heard, I don't know how much of that is true, but I have heard the only reason he lost his seat is because the party, Invisible Party, dropped his support from him due to the incident that happened to unfortunately, the accident happened to the president of the Conservative Party in his ward. Apparently, the president, the small daughter of the president of the Conservative Party, was killed in an accident a couple years ago in the ward that was represented by him. And apparently, again, it is gossip, but apparently they tried certain changes in the traffic law and traffic signs over there, which was not done. But unfortunately, it's not his call. It is the call of the city council. But
he didn't have a resounding, convincing victory in 2010, as you may recall. It was actually quite a close election in 2010. That's Ward 26, isn't it?
Yes.
John Parker. That was a close election in 2010.
But even this time they brought a new member who was supported by Conservative Party. So there is a party. I mean, the support of the party is behind these incumbents.
Right.
You cannot deny that. They don't deny it. They don't say don't talk about it, but they have a photo up with a prominent member of those parties.
Sure, yeah.
So then we had, of course, we have Karen Stentz in our actually in our 18th show, who educated us, especially in this particular clip, regarding the development. If you recall, talking about how in her ward, this is the 30.
Well, I also found that particularly interesting, the discussion about the football.
Oh, yes. You don't expect someone in the politics after 11 years, especially female politician, who has spent most of her time with the TDC issue and all of that, and come over there and pinpoint which team is going to win, which one. Tampa Bay was her choice. North.
Baltimore Ravens.
North Green Bay.
Favorite team, Baltimore Ravens. So the fact that her husband's a Patriots fan causes a separate NFL viewing in there.
in the household, yeah.
Okay.
So the highest challenge they have in the household is just disagreement over the football team.
This is a serious issue.
And of course, we had the issue with we had the, you said Ward 29. I bring you someone that probably you remember because you were moderator in that debate.
Yes.
Jimmy Veloc. Yes. And he
actually that was a good show. That was a good show. Two very interesting, articulate candidates.
And he actually was introducing in this show how you can bring inconsistency up. The venues, the different.
Imagine that, rather than spend money.
Spending money, saving money,
running city council at a profit.
Yes, and simple. He brought a couple of the simple issues. It's like putting advertisement in the parkings and this kind of a thing, or using certain facilities for certain other things. It's very simple issues, and I don't know. These people are not in the city hall to work for us.
City halls. I'm going to introduce.
I don't know. Ask them.
No. So overall, we had a quiet run in last. This is 20th show in 10 months.
I think it was. I mean, it was certainly one of the more interesting things I've done, and I wanna thank you for doing this with me.
Thank you for being with me along the way.
And some very, very interesting interviews.
And what do you think we should do for the next year?
Well, I heard there's a federal election coming.
Yeah, I have heard about that about 5 years ago, and I'm pretty sure.
Oh, you remember it though?
Yeah.
I tend to forget these things unless reminded.
And especially with the engagement of the federal government into another war, kind of the war with the ISIS, it will be very interesting to see how much a popularity they have.
Well, your prediction: will the Conservative Party be re-elected?
I think Conservative Party will be re-elected. Whether gets the majority is another. It depends to the deals and wheels between NDP and Liberals. But the numbers are not there. As you know, we will have 30 more seats. So it will be 338 seats.
Right.
To have 170, to have majority, you have to have 170 seats. Mm-hmm. Right now, NDP has 98, and Liberals have about 40, 39 or 40. So even if you put two of them together, they cannot make the majority unless they can or gain 30 seats from Conservatives.
Right.
Do you think it's possible?
Well, anything is possible. The question is, I think it's likely.
Yeah. Likely.
I
Yes.
think that it's going to be difficult to beat the conservatives. They're good at what they do, that is running elections. But we will see. We will see. One of the things that I think you got to remember is that would be 2015. Stephen Harper became prime minister in January of 2006. 9 years is a long, long run in politics, and
John Christian was 13.
Was he 13?
No, 10, 11 years, I believe.
Well, it's a long time, and people get restless and dissatisfied. And Chrétien famously once said that nobody defeats incumbent governments; they defeat themselves. I don't know whether the Conservatives will be re-elected or not, but I do think at this stage, with 9 years of history behind it, the Harper government has certainly given the people of Canada enough room and enough issues so that one could argue they planted the seeds of their own defeat. We will see, though. We will see.
But don't forget, they formed a majority government with just 18% of the eligible voters.
I mean, that is extraordinary. Every time I hear you say that, my reaction is, for our viewers, could you explain that again? I mean, think of it. Think of it, everybody. Or anybody.
Because out of 25 million eligible voters.
Run the example.
The example is...
Think of this. 18%. If you can get 18%...
If you have
the eligible voters in the country, you can have a majority government.
That's all. How? It's very simple. Let's say, you mentioned that example on our first show. Assume a ward has 100 residents, 100 eligible voters, 100 eligible voters, and there is 3 front runner or 3 runner, period.
Right.
Let's say in this case, federally conservative, NDP, and liberal. And if 50% of them don't show up for the votes, or even 40% don't show up for the vote,
so we're left with 60
voters.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So if out of 60 voters, they get the person who gets 21 votes can win the majority.
That's right, because if you get 21 votes, you get more.
If it is 60,
you get more than anybody else.
If it is 50,
21 out of 60
is a 39, and 39 you divide it by 2 others. None of them pass the post.
Hence the problem of first past the post.
And if you have 50, this number comes lower.
My God. And we call this democracy. Bahman, thanks for great.
Thank you for the gradient to be with me. And who knows what will happen. This is memory lane, reminiscing from the past.
That's right, a bit of a trip down memory lane.
Nostalgia.
Thanks for taking the time to find those great clips.
So I wish you a Happy New Year, and I will see you most likely in next year.
Or maybe even this year again.
Yep.
Who knows?
And for our viewer, thank you for being with us. As always, don't forget, take part in your electoral process, in your democracy. Be volunteer, donate, advertise, educate, or be a candidate. Good night.
Good night. Thank you very much.